My father smacked the back of my head at my own dinner party because I wouldn't pour him another drink. So I poured him something he wasn't expecting. My father hit me for the first time when I was 6. I spilled grape juice on the carpet and he smacked the back of my head so hard my teeth clicked together. He didn't apologize. He told me to clean it up and stop being clumsy. That was the first time. It wasn't the last. Every mistake came with a smack to the back of the head. Dropped a fork at dinner. Smack. Took too long in the bathroom. Smack. Forgot to take out the trash. Smack. He never punched me. Never left a bruise anyone could see. Just that open palm to the back of the skull, hard enough to make my ears ring every single time. My mother never said a word. She'd look at the table or suddenly find something to do at the sink. By the time I was 14, I flinched every time someone walked behind me. My teachers noticed. My friends noticed. My father didn't notice, or he didn't care. He thought it was discipline. He called it correction. I called it the reason I moved 4 hours away the day I turned 18 and didn't come back for 6 years. I came back because my mother got sick, not for him. I spent 3 months driving back and forth helping her recover from surgery, while my father sat in his chair and complained nobody was cooking for him. I watched this grown man microwave canned soup and act like he was suffering. When she got better, I kept visiting once a month because she asked me to. Every visit, that hand would still come up if I said something he didn't like. The last time before this dinner, I was 24. He smacked me in front of my cousin over politics. My cousin looked at the floor. My father kept talking like nothing happened. I told myself I was done, but I wasn't done. I kept showing up. I met Angela 2 years later. We got married when I was 28. Angela knew about my father. She'd seen me flinch at restaurants when a waiter passed behind my chair. She never pushed me to talk about it, but she understood. We bought a house last year. Nice place with a big open layout and a dining room that could fit 12. Angela wanted a housewarming dinner. I told her I didn't want to invite my father. Then my mother called and asked if they could come see the new house, and she sounded so excited that I couldn't say no. I told Angela we'd get through one dinner. That would be it. I spent 2 days cooking. Roasted lamb, garlic potatoes, homemade bread, 3 sides. Angela made dessert. We set the table for 10. My parents, Angela's parents, my brother Roland and his wife Angelique, our neighbors Phil and Donna. The house looked perfect. My father walked in and the first thing he said was that the entryway was too narrow. Not hello, not congratulations. The entryway was too narrow. I let it go. He was on his 3rd glass of wine before the main course was served. By the time we were halfway through the lamb, he'd finished a bottle and was reaching for the next. I moved it toward the center, away from his reach. He asked me to pour him another. I told him maybe he should slow down since dessert was still coming. He stared at me for about 3 seconds. Then he said, "Don't tell me what to do in front of people." I told him this was my house and I was asking him to pace himself. He put his fork down. Everyone at the table was eating quietly now. Angela was watching me. My mother was looking at her plate. He pushed his chair back, walked around behind me, and smacked the back of my head, hard. The same way he'd done it my entire life, in front of my wife, in front of her parents, in front of my brother and our neighbors, in my own home, at a table I built myself, over a meal I'd spent 2 days preparing, because I asked him to slow down on wine. Angela's mother put her hand over her mouth. Phil and Donna looked at each other. Roland closed his eyes like he'd seen this movie 100 times. I stood up. My chair scraped back. I told him to sit down. He looked surprised, like a dog that just got told no for the first time in its life. He said, "Relax, I'm just messing with you." I told him he wasn't messing with me. I told him he'd been hitting me since I was 6 and that it was over. Right now, tonight. He rolled his eyes and told me to stop making a scene. I walked to the front door and opened it. I told him to leave. Harrison didn't move. He turned back to the table and said, "Somebody want to tell my son he's embarrassing himself?" His voice was loud and steady, the voice of a man who had been winning arguments in his own house for 30 years and couldn't imagine losing one in someone else's. He looked at Roland first. Roland said nothing, just stared at the salt shaker. He looked at Amatis, my father-in-law. Amatis sat with both hands flat on the table and gave Harrison nothing. He turned to Phil. Phil looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on the planet. Nobody said a word. The whole room was so quiet I could hear the ice settling in someone's water glass. For a second, I saw something flash across his face. Confusion. Like a man who pressed a button that had worked every single time for decades and nothing happened. Then Janie broke. My mother stood up slow and shaky and pushed her napkin onto the table and said, "Please, just sit down, both of you. We're having a nice dinner." She walked to me at the door and put her hand on my arm. Her fingers were cold. She leaned in close and whispered, "Don't do this tonight. Not in front of everyone. He's your father." And I felt the pull. That old familiar gravity that had been dragging me back into line my entire life. My grip on the door loosened. My shoulders started to drop. I was about to close it. Then Angela spoke. She didn't stand up. She didn't yell. She said it from where she was sitting at the table, calm and clear. 3 words that cut through everything my mother was whispering. "He hit you." 3 words. I felt them land in my chest. My mother's hand was still on my arm, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. I straightened up. My grip tightened on the door. I didn't close it. Harrison saw me hesitate and laughed that short, mean little laugh I'd heard 1,000 times. He said, "See, even your mother knows you're overreacting. Sit down and eat your dinner like a man." And he turned back to the table, pulled his chair out, and sat down. He reached for the wine bottle. I let go of the door. I walked across the room and picked up the bottle before his fingers got to it. I carried it to the counter and set it down far away from him. Then I turned around and said, "You don't get to sit at my table after putting your hands on me. You never did. You just never gave me a choice before. I'm giving myself one now." Harrison's hand dropped to the table. The room was dead still. Harrison turned to Amatis and Primrose with that wounded father face. "I apologize, you have to see this. I raised him better than this. One little tap and he's kicking his own father out." Amatis didn't move, didn't nod, didn't shake his head. He gave Harrison absolutely nothing to work with. Primrose looked up at him and said quiet and clear, "That wasn't a tap." Harrison blinked. He wasn't used to this. He was used to rooms full of people who looked away and let it slide. He turned away from Primrose and pivoted to Roland. "Roland, tell him I never hurt either of you. Tell them this is how we grew up. It's not a big deal." Roland opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Angelique reached under the table and grabbed his hand. He swallowed hard and said, "Dad, maybe we should just go." His voice was small, the voice of a kid, not a grown man. Harrison's face twisted. "You too? Both my sons are going to sit here and disrespect me?" I looked at Roland. I said, "You flinch too. I've seen you do it. Every time someone reaches past you for the salt, you duck." Roland's eyes went glassy. Angelique squeezed his hand harder. Nobody had ever said that out loud before, not once. In all the years of family dinners and holidays where Roland and I sat next to each other and pretended we were fine. We both knew it. We both lived it. But saying it out loud in a room full of people was something brand new. Phil cleared his throat. He shifted in his chair and leaned toward Donna and said quietly, maybe we should give them some space. I turned to Phil. No, stay. I want witnesses. I've never had witnesses before because it always happened behind closed doors. Tonight it happened at my table and I want everyone in this room to see exactly who he is. Phil stopped moving. Donna's hand went still on his knee. My whole life, every single time Harrison hit me, it happened where nobody could see, or where the people who saw knew better than to say anything. Behind closed doors, in hallways, in living rooms full of family members who had all agreed without ever saying it out loud that this was just how things were. Not tonight. Harrison slammed his palm flat on the table. The glasses rattled. I flinched, just out of habit, but I caught myself. He leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. You want to air family business? Fine. Let's talk about who paid for your first apartment. Who bought your first car? You want to throw all that away over a tap on the head? I said, you bought me things because you felt guilty. I would have traded every single one of them for a father who didn't make me afraid to turn my back. Harrison's mouth opened and then closed. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock above the doorway ticking. He was running out of people to recruit. Janie was crying into a napkin at the far end of the table. Roland wouldn't look at him. Amatis and Primrose were sitting in stunned silence. I had one more thing to say. My voice dropped low, not quiet like I was scared, low like I was reading something into the record. I said, the first time, I was 6. Grape juice on the carpet. The last time before tonight, I was 24. He smacked me in front of my cousin because I disagreed with him about politics. 24 years old and my own father hit me at a family gathering like I was nothing. I turned and looked at the empty chair near the far end of the table. Hubert wasn't here tonight. He hadn't been invited, but I could still see his face from that day, the way he'd looked at the floor, the way he'd suddenly needed to check his phone. I said, every family member who's ever seen it happen did the same thing. They looked away. Every single one. My cousin, my aunts, my uncles. People who watched a grown man hit a child, and then a teenager, and then a young man, and not one of them ever opened their mouth. I turned to Janie. Including you, Mom. Janie's face crumbled. She covered her eyes and her shoulders started shaking. She pulled her hands down and looked at me through wet, red eyes. I didn't know how to stop him. I thought if I said something it would get worse. I said, it got worse anyway. It just got worse for me, alone. Angela stood up from the table and walked over to me. She put her hand on my back, right between my shoulder blades, and stood there. She wasn't trying to calm me down. She wasn't shushing me. She was just standing there, solid and warm and real, holding me up. I looked at Harrison. His jaw was tight, not angry tight, something else. His eyes were wet, not crying, but there was a shine there that I had never seen before in my entire life. Not when his own mother died. Not when Janie was in the hospital. Not ever. His mouth opened and the whole room held its breath. Like maybe, after 30 years, some piece of the truth had worked its way past the armor. He took a breath. He looked at me, and he said, my father did the same thing to me, and I turned out fine. The room went dead. Like all the air got sucked out at once. I had thought for one stupid, hopeful second, he was going to say he was sorry. He was doubling down. Standing in my dining room saying that hitting your kid was fine because his dad did it to him. Like it was tradition. Like it was something to be proud of. I said, you didn't turn out fine. You turned out like this. Standing in your son's house after hitting him at his own table, and you still think you're the victim. Harrison's face went red. He turned to Roland. He pointed at me and snapped, at least your brother doesn't cry about everything. You were always the soft one. Always the problem. Roland's whole body jerked back in his chair. His face went blank, the way a person looks when they've been hit so hard emotionally that their brain shuts everything off to protect itself. Angelique was on her feet before the last word was out. Don't you dare talk to him like that. Then the room came apart. Janie was saying, Harrison, stop. Please just stop. Over and over through her tears. Angelique was still standing, still facing Harrison. Primrose turned to Amatis and said, we need to go. I raised my hand. Nobody's leaving yet. The room went quiet all at once. I looked at Harrison, except him. But first, I have something for him. I turned around and walked into the next room. Every single person in that dining room watched me walk out. Words didn't work with Harrison. He only understood gestures, bold ones. So I was about to give him one he'd remember for the rest of his life. I reached into the cabinet and grabbed a plain glass from the top shelf. I turned on the tap and filled it with cold water. Nothing else. Just water. This is the part where I poured him something he wasn't expecting. I came back and stopped right in front of Harrison. I held the glass out the way you'd offer someone a drink at a normal dinner party. He looked down at it. He said, what's this? Like he genuinely didn't understand. I said, it's water, because that's the last thing I'll ever serve you in my house. Harrison's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I set it down on the table, right in front of his place setting, next to the plate of lamb and garlic potatoes and homemade bread I'd spent 2 days making. Then I reached for his wine glass, the one he'd been drinking from all night, the one that started this whole thing. I picked it up and carried it to the sink. I came back and picked up his plate. The food was still warm. I set it in the sink on top of the wine glass. I came back again. His napkin, the cloth one Angela had picked out special for tonight. I carried it to the sink. Then the silverware, the fork, the knife, the spoon. One trip for each piece because I wanted him to feel every single one. I wanted everyone in that room to watch me dismantle his place at my table piece by piece, the way he'd taken apart my sense of safety piece by piece for my entire childhood. The room was silent the whole time. When I was done, all that was left was his chair, the bare wood, and one glass of water sitting there all by itself. I looked at Harrison. Your seat at my table is gone. Tonight and every night after. Harrison stared at the empty space where his plate had been. The anger was thinner now. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. He said, you're really going to do this over nothing? Over nothing. 22 years of being hit. Thousands of smacks. A childhood spent flinching at footsteps. A grown man who still ducked when a waiter walked behind his chair at a restaurant. That was nothing to him. I said, over nothing? Put your hand on the back of my head one more time and see what happens. I'm not 6 years old anymore. Then Janie stood up. Her mascara was smeared under both eyes. Her hands were shaking. She looked at me and said, if your father goes, I go. My stomach clenched. Hard. There it was. The cost. The real cost. The one I'd been thinking about for years. It wasn't losing my father. I'd lost my father the first time he hit me when I was 6. The cost was losing her. The woman who drove me to school every morning and packed notes in my lunch and sat next to my bed when I was sick. The woman who never once hit me, but also the woman who never once stopped him. I thought about driving 4 hours each way to take care of her while Harrison complained about canned soup. I thought about all of it, and I said, then I'll miss you, Mom, but I won't miss being hit, and I won't raise a family in a house where a man can put his hands on me and everyone pretends it didn't happen. Janie made a sound I don't know how to describe. Grief. Old, heavy grief. Angela stepped forward. She walked toward Janie. Her face was gentle, but her voice was firm. You're welcome in our home anytime you want to come alone. Then she turned to Harrison. The kindness was gone. But you will never touch my husband again. Not in this house. Not anywhere. Primrose nodded from her chair. Amadis pushed his chair back and stood next to me, arms folded across his chest. The lines were drawn. Phil and Donna staying because I'd asked them to. Harrison's eyes searched the room one more time. They landed on Roland. My brother didn't look up. He just sat there crying at my table, and that was his answer. Harrison stood there alone. He said quieter now. I gave you everything. I worked double shifts so you could have this life, and this is how you repay me. I said, you gave me things. You never gave me safety. There's a difference. A father's job isn't just to provide, it's to protect. And the person I needed protection from was you. I watched the last bit of his argument die on his face. And that's when a man like Harrison becomes the most dangerous version of himself. Because when he runs out of words, he goes back to the only language he's ever really spoken. His spine straightened, his shoulders pulled back, his chin came up. He went from looking small and lost to looking like the man who used to stand in our hallway doorway when I was a kid, the man whose shadow on the wall meant something bad was about to happen. He started walking toward me, and then his hand came up, the same open palm, the same arc that had been connecting with the back of my head since I was 6. The whole room sucked in air at the same time. Angela stepped forward like she was going to put herself between us. Amadis tensed up next to me, but I didn't need them. Something was different this time. I watched his hand come up, and my body did something it had never done before. It stayed still. My shoulders didn't hunch. My head didn't duck. My eyes didn't close. I didn't flinch. For the first time in 22 years, I did not flinch. I reached up and caught his wrist in the middle of that arc. My hand closed around it, and I held it. Firm and steady. I looked at him, and I said one word. No. Harrison's eyes went wide. He pulled. He tried to yank his hand away from me. A sharp jerk like he was insulted I was even touching him, but I didn't let go. I said, look at me. Look at your son. He looked at me. I said, I'm not afraid of you anymore, and you need to leave my house right now. His face fell apart into humiliation. Real, raw, naked humiliation. The kind he'd been handing to me and Roland for decades. He yanked his hand free, hard enough that he stumbled half a step backward. I let him go. The message was delivered. Janie walked across the room with slow, careful steps and took his arm, gently, the way she probably took his arm on their wedding day. Her face was a mess. Tears and mascara and 22 years of things she should have said but didn't. She held onto his arm and turned to me. I'm sorry. Her voice was barely there. Then again, louder. I'm so sorry I never stopped him. Something broke in my chest. My eyes got hot and my throat got tight and my voice came out cracked when I said, I know, Mom, just that, because I did know. I'd always known she was scared too. She was trapped in the same house with the same man and she chose survival the same way I did. We just survived differently. She turned and walked him toward the front door. Harrison went with her. He didn't fight. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He walked through the doorway and out into the night like a man leaving a building that was never his. Janie followed. She paused at the threshold. I thought she might turn around. She didn't. She stepped through. I closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. Angela crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me, both arms around my shoulders, her face pressed against the side of my neck. I put my arms around her and closed my eyes and let her hold me up one more time. Then I heard Roland's voice from the table, rough, like he'd been swallowing sandpaper. I should have said something. Years ago. I should have said something. I let go of Angela and walked over to my brother. I put my hand on his shoulder. I could feel him shaking. I said, you can say something now. You can stop going back. Roland nodded, slow and heavy, like his head weighed 100 pounds, but it was a real nod. It meant something. Phil stood up from his chair. He looked at me and said, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen someone do at a dinner table. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. Then I looked at the other end of the table. Harrison's chair was pushed back at an angle, empty. And there on the bare wood, right where his plate and wine glass and silverware used to be, sat the glass of water, untouched, full to the top. He hadn't taken a single sip. The last thing I ever served my father in my home. Not wine from the bottle he'd been guzzling all night. Not a plate from the meal I spent 2 days cooking. Not the dessert Angela made with her own hands. Just water. The bare minimum you'd give to any stranger who knocked on your door. And even that was more than Harrison ever gave me. I pulled my chair back to the table. I sat down, at the head of my own table, in my own house. I put my hands flat on the table in front of me and looked at the people who were still there. Angela, Amadis, Primrose, Roland and Angelique, Phil and Donna. And for the first time in my life, I didn't check to see if anyone was standing behind me.